Commander Mason Rourke seized the folder out of her hands before she could stop him slamming it against the table so hard, the room went silent. "You don't touch classified material in my briefing," he snarled, standing over her like she was nothing. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't reach for the folder. She simply looked up at him, eyes cold and steady, and said 4 words that would end his career before the sun rose. "You just made history. If you love stories where quiet strength destroys arrogance, hit subscribe and stay with me until the very end. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight." Nobody in that briefing room expected the day to end the way it did. Commander Mason Rourke had walked into hundreds of rooms just like this one. Rooms filled with operators who respected only one currency: proof. Proof under fire. Proof in blood. Proof in the kind of silence that came after a man had done something no one else could do. He had that silence. He had earned it in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in places whose names never made it into a newspaper. 19 years in the Navy. 11 of them inside Naval Special Warfare. 2 silver stars he never talked about, and a reputation that walked into rooms before he did. So when a woman in a plain dark jacket stepped through the secure door carrying nothing but a tablet and a folder, Mason didn't see a threat. He didn't see a colleague. He saw an interruption. "Can I help you?" he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. Evelyn Carter didn't answer right away. She scanned the room, once found the empty seat closest to the tactical display, and walked toward it like she'd done it 100 times before. Chief Petty Officer Dale Briggs elbowed the man next to him and grinned. She lost. A few laughs rippled through the room. Not cruel yet. Just the easy, careless kind of laughter men give each other when they think they already know how a moment is going to end. Mason crossed his arms. "Ma'am, this room is restricted." "I'm aware," Evelyn said, sitting down and opening her tablet. "Then you understand you need to leave." She looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were calm in a way that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "I have clearance for this briefing, Commander." "Everybody in here has clearance," Mason said. "Clearance isn't the question. The question is, why civilian personnel are sitting in on a Tier 1 operational briefing 3 hours before insertion. Because I was ordered to be here." "By who?" "By the same command structure that put you in that chair," she said, and went back to her tablet. The room went quiet in a different way now. Not amused. Watching. Mason felt something tighten in his chest, something he recognized from every argument he'd ever had with someone who refused to back down. He didn't like it. He'd spent 2 decades building a version of himself that nobody challenged in front of his men, and here was a woman half his size, doing it without raising her voice. "Lost sweetheart?" he said. The words landed exactly the way he wanted them to. Briggs barked out a laugh. 2 other operators grinned and looked away, pretending not to enjoy it as much as they did. Master Chief Terrence Owens, sitting near the back, didn't laugh. He watched Evelyn's face carefully, the way a man watches weather before a storm. Evelyn set the tablet down slowly. "I am exactly where I was ordered to be," she said. "Maybe you misunderstood the assignment," Mason said. "This is a Tier 1 briefing. Not a classroom, not an internship. If somebody sent you here by mistake, I'll have someone walk you back to admin." The laughter came again, louder this time. Evelyn didn't join it. She didn't shrink from it either. She simply turned her attention back to the tablet, scrolling through data that none of them could see her face unreadable, and that silence, that refusal to give him the reaction he wanted, made something ugly flicker behind Mason's eyes. "You always this quiet when men are talking," he said. Owens shifted in his seat. "Commander?" "I'm handling this, Master Chief." Evelyn still didn't look up. "You can keep talking, Commander. I have work to do." The room held its breath. Nobody spoke to Mason Rourke like that. Not junior officers, not visiting brass, not anyone who valued their career in this command. Mason took a step closer, close enough that his shadow fell across her tablet screen. "Let me explain something," he said, voice low now. Dangerous in the way men get when an audience makes them feel invincible. "In 3 hours, my team is going into hostile territory to bring 6 hostages home alive. I don't have time to babysit somebody's assistant." Evelyn finally looked up again, and this time there was something new in her expression. Not anger, something colder and more precise. I'm not anyone's assistant. Then what are you? Someone who's about to make sure your team doesn't die tomorrow because a man like you decided he already knew everything he needed to know about me. The room went dead silent. For a moment, Mason didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected her to fight back with words that sharp, that certain. He recovered quickly, forcing a smirk onto his face, playing to the room the way he always did. Bold words for someone who hasn't introduced herself. You didn't ask. I'm asking now. Dr. Evelyn Carter, she said. Pacific Command Intelligence. Briggs whistled low. Doctor, fancy. PhD or no PhD, Mason said. This room belongs to operators who've bled for the right to sit in it, not analysts who read reports from 3,000 miles away. Evelyn's jaw tightened just slightly. It was the first real crack in her composure, and Mason noticed it, and something in him relaxed, because that crack told him he was winning. He didn't know yet that he wasn't. He didn't know that in less than an hour, everything he believed about who deserved to be in that room would collapse in front of every man who had just laughed at his joke. The briefing resumed, but the air in the room had changed. Mason moved through the operational overview with his usual confidence insertion points, extraction routes, contingency plans for 6 different failure scenarios. But every few minutes his eyes drifted back to the woman in the corner who refused to look intimidated. She wasn't taking notes the way analysts usually did. She wasn't nodding along to make herself seem engaged. She was cross-referencing something on her tablet, her brow furrowed, her fingers moving with a speed that suggested she wasn't just listening to the briefing. She was already 3 steps ahead of it. Problem, Dr. Carter? Mason asked, unable to help himself. Not yet, she said. Not yet, Briggs repeated under his breath, smirking at the man beside him. Mason clicked to the next slide, a satellite overlay of the extraction zone red markers, denoting known hostile positions along the coastline. Enemy presence is estimated at platoon strength dug in along this ridge. Drone surveillance puts their patrol rotation at 40-minute intervals. We hit during the gap. That data is 6 hours old, Evelyn said. The room turned toward her again. Excuse me, Mason said. Your patrol rotation numbers. They're based on drone footage from early this morning. Enemy patrol behavior in that region has changed twice in the last week. We have live satellite feed confirming current positions. Do you? Evelyn asked, and there was something almost gentle in the way she said it, like she already knew the answer and hated to be the one to say it out loud. Because I've been watching that feed for the last 10 minutes, Commander, and it hasn't updated once. Every head in the room turned to the tactical display. Owens leaned forward, squinting at the corner timestamp. His face changed. She's right, he said quietly. Feed's frozen. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the operations officer at the comm station started typing rapidly, brow-furrowing fingers moving faster and faster across his keyboard. Sir, I'm not getting a response from the satellite relay. Reroute it, Mason said. Rerouting. Seconds passed. Then the tactical display flickered, and the red markers along the coastline began to shift, not update, but scatter positions, jumping erratically across the map like a hand had reached in and scrambled the pieces. What is that? Briggs said, standing up. Feed's corrupted, the comm officer said, voice tightening. I don't know what's happening. It's like something's actively fighting the connection. Mason's jaw locked. Fix it. I'm trying, sir. It's not. The screen went black. Every screen in the room went black at the same moment, all 6 tactical displays dying together like a held breath finally released. The overhead lighting flickered once, twice, then steadied into a dim, amber emergency setting. For 3 full seconds, nobody in that room said a word. Then, chaos. Operators rose from their seats. The comm officer was on his radio demanding status from network security. Briggs was shouting something about backup systems. Mason stood frozen for half a heartbeat, just half a heartbeat, but Owens saw it, that flicker of a man who had built his entire identity on always knowing what to do next, suddenly not knowing. Then Mason found his voice again, louder than before, sharper. Somebody get me answers, now. Sir, network security says it's not on their end. Then whose end is it on? Nobody answered him. Mason turned, scanning the room for someone to blame, and his eyes landed on Evelyn. She hadn't moved. While everyone else had jumped to their feet, she remained seated calm, watching the dead screens with an expression that wasn't panic. It was concentration. "You," Mason said. "You said the feed was frozen before anyone else noticed." "I did." "How did you know?" "Because I've spent the last 4 months building the exact system that just went down," Evelyn said, and stood up for the first time, walking toward the main console without waiting for permission. "And I know what it looks like when someone attacks it from the outside." "Attacks it," Mason repeated. "You're saying this isn't a malfunction?" "I'm saying someone wanted your team blind 3 hours before insertion, Commander, and it worked." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Briggs laughed, but it came out thin and uncertain this time. "You're telling me the Chinese or the Iranians or whoever the hell hacked a Tier 1 command network in the middle of a live op? I'm telling you, someone did," Evelyn said, already crouched at the main console pulling a cable from her bag that none of them recognized. "I don't know who yet, but I intend to find out in the next 4 minutes because that's roughly how long you have before this mission gets scrubbed and 6 hostages stay exactly where they are." Mason stared at her. Every instinct he had built over 19 years told him this wasn't how things were supposed to go. Analysts didn't take control of command consoles. Analysts didn't give operators timelines. Analysts sat quietly in corners and answered questions when asked. But no one else in that room had an answer. And the clock was moving. "Let her work," Owen said quietly. Mason looked at his Master Chief like he'd been slapped. "Excuse me. You heard me, Commander. Let her work. We don't have another option right now, and she's the only person in this room who sounds like she knows what just happened." For a long, tense moment, Mason didn't move. Every man in the room was watching him now, waiting to see whether Pride would win or whether something else would. "You have 4 minutes," Mason said finally. "Then I'm scrubbing the mission and reporting a security failure straight to Pacific Command." "Understood," Evelyn said, not looking up. Her hands moved across the tablet and the exposed console wiring with a precision that made the room go quiet in an entirely different way than before. This wasn't the silence of mockery anymore. It was the silence of people watching something they didn't understand and couldn't look away from. "Talk to me," Owen said, crouching beside her. "What are you seeing?" "Someone injected false telemetry into the satellite relay about 6 hours ago," Evelyn said. Eyes locked on a stream of code scrolling faster than anyone else in the room could read. It was subtle, small enough that it wouldn't trigger an automatic alert. It sat there quiet, feeding slightly altered coordinates into your tactical system every time it updated. "Altered how?" Owens asked. "Enemy positions shifted by roughly 400 meters, enough to look accurate on a quick glance. Enough to get your team walking into a kill zone instead of a rescue corridor." Briggs went pale. 400 meters puts us directly under that ridge." "Yes," Evelyn said. "It does." Mason's chest tightened. He thought about the insertion plan he had built with his own hands, the confidence he'd had walking his team through it 20 minutes ago, the absolute certainty in his own voice as he explained exactly where the enemy would and wouldn't be. He had been about to walk his men into a trap, and he hadn't seen it. He hadn't even suspected it. She had. Why didn't the automatic systems catch this? Mason asked, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his voice, only something that sounded uncomfortably close to fear. "Because whoever did this understood exactly how those systems work," Evelyn said. "This wasn't some outside actor guessing at vulnerabilities. This was someone who knew the architecture, someone who knew the update intervals, someone who knew precisely how much drift would go unnoticed." The room absorbed that slowly. "You're saying this was an inside job?" Owens said quietly. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Her fingers kept moving, kept tracing the intrusion backward through layers of code hunting for its origin point. "I'm saying," she said finally, "that whoever built this attack had access most outside actors don't get, and I intend to find out who." Mason felt the floor shift under him in a way no firefight ever had. "Dr. Carter!" he said, and his voice had lost its edge entirely now. Can you restore the feed? I'm working on it. How long? As long as it takes to do it correctly, Commander. I'm not interested in giving your men a screen that looks fixed. I'm interested in giving them a screen they can trust with their lives. Nobody argued with that. The next 90 seconds passed in a silence so complete that the only sound in the room was the soft click of Evelyn's fingers against the tablet and the low hum of the emergency lighting overhead. Every SEAL who had laughed 20 minutes earlier now stood watching her with an expression none of them would have admitted to feeling something between disbelief and the beginning of respect. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back to life, not with the frozen data from before, with something new. A complete tactical layout rebuilt from raw satellite input, Evelyn had pulled directly rather than through the compromised relay. Enemy positions. Confirmed patrol timing. A revised insertion route that avoided the exact kill zone the false data had been steering them toward. Owens stared at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen. That's not possible, he said. That's not nobody rebuilds a battlefield network in 4 minutes. 3 minutes and 51 seconds, Evelyn said, standing up and setting the tablet down. But who's counting? For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Briggs, still staring at the corrected map, said quietly, She just saved this entire mission. She just saved this entire team, Owens corrected. Mason said nothing at all. He was still staring at the screen at the map that would have sent his men directly into an ambush at the numbers that had been altered so precisely he never would have questioned them. He looked at Evelyn. She was already gathering her things, already moving toward the door. Like this was simply another task completed, another problem solved, nothing that required acknowledgement or applause. Wait, Mason said. She stopped. Who are you? He asked again, but this time the question meant something entirely different than it had 20 minutes ago. Evelyn turned to face him, and for the first time, something almost like sympathy crossed her expression. I already told you, Commander. I mean who you really are. Nobody builds a system like that overnight. Nobody catches an intrusion that's sophisticated in seconds. Nobody rebuilds a battlefield network faster than a team of engineers could diagnose the problem. I told you my name, Evelyn said, and I told you my clearance. What you choose to believe about the rest is entirely up to you. She walked out of the room, and the door sealed shut behind her with a soft mechanical hiss that somehow felt louder than the alarms had been. For a long moment, nobody in the briefing room moved. Then Briggs let out a breath. Anyone else feel like we just got our asses handed to us by someone we were laughing at 10 minutes ago? Nobody answered because everybody already knew. Mason stood in the center of the room staring at the door she'd walked through, replaying every word he'd said to her since she'd first stepped inside. Sweetheart, assistant, internship. Each word came back to him now with a weight he hadn't expected, landing somewhere low in his chest that felt uncomfortably like shame. Sir, the comm officer said carefully, orders. Mason didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to reconcile the woman who had just walked out that door with the woman he had mocked in front of his entire team less than half an hour earlier. Same person. Two completely different realities, and he was only now beginning to understand which one had been true all along. Prep the team, he said finally. Insertion in 2 hours. New coordinates, corrected route. Yes, sir. As the room began to move again, operators checking gear, comm officers verifying the restored network, Owens walked up beside Mason and lowered his voice so only the two of them could hear. You know what bothers me the most? Owens said. What's that? Not that she was right, not even that she saved us. What bothers me is she didn't even look angry when you called her sweetheart in front of 30 men. She just looked like she'd seen it before, like it wasn't even surprising to her anymore. Mason didn't answer. Because Owens was right, and it was the kind of right that sat heavy in a man's chest and didn't leave easily. 2 hours later, the team assembled for final gear checks, the corrected tactical data glowing steady and unbroken on every screen in the command center. Mason moved through his checklist with the same discipline he always brought to mission prep, but something had shifted in him, something he couldn't quite name yet. He kept thinking about the 4 minutes. He kept thinking about how close his team had come to walking directly into a kill zone, Because he had trusted a data feed without questioning it, while the person who had questioned it, who had caught it, who had fixed it, was someone he'd spent the morning humiliating in front of 30 of his own men. "Commander," Owen said, approaching with a tablet in hand. "Network security just finished their preliminary sweep. And they're confirming everything Dr. Carter said. Deliberate intrusion, sophisticated. Whoever did this had detailed knowledge of our system's architecture." Mason's stomach tightened. "Internal access. That's what they're saying, which means somebody in this command or close to it either helped build that attack or handed someone the blueprint to build it." Owens nodded grimly. "There's more." "What?" "They pulled a partial signature off the intrusion code before Dr. Carter overwrote it during the rebuild. It's not a full identification, but it's a start." "Where's it pointing?" "Too early to say for certain. But whoever wrote that code wasn't some random actor working off open-source exploits. This was custom, tailored specifically to our system's update intervals and encryption cycle." Mason felt something cold settle in his chest. "That's not something you find on the black market," he said quietly. "No," Owens agreed. "It's not." Neither of them said the word out loud yet, but it was sitting there between them, unavoidable and ugly. Mole. Before Mason could respond, the comm officer's voice cut through the room, tight with urgency. "Sir, we're picking up unusual radio traffic on a frequency we don't monitor. Encrypted, but it's pinging off our own relay towers." "Show me." The comm officer pulled up a waveform, jagged and irregular bursts of encrypted data pulsing every few seconds like a heartbeat. "It started about 90 seconds after Dr. Carter restored the network," the comm officer said. "Whoever's behind this knows we caught the intrusion, and they're not backing off." Mason stared at the pulsing signal, the weight of everything that had happened in the last 2 hours pressing down on him at once. The woman he'd mocked, the trap he'd nearly walked his team into, the mole somewhere inside his own command. And now this, a second wave already forming before the first had even finished settling. "Get Dr. Carter back in here," he said. "Now." "Sir, she left the building 20 minutes ago. Said she had another briefing." "Another briefing where?" The comm officer hesitated. "Sir, her clearance profile just came through from Pacific Command. There's a flag on it. High-level access restriction. It says any further inquiries into her assignment need to be routed through..." He stopped. "Through who?" Mason asked. The comm officer looked up, and there was something uneasy in his expression, now something that made the hair on the back of Mason's neck stand up. "Through General Hayes' office directly, sir. Personal authorization required." The room went quiet again, that same heavy silence that had settled over it twice already that day. Mason looked at the pulsing signal on the screen, then at the restricted clearance flag glowing on the comm officer's display, then at the door Evelyn had walked through hours earlier without a hint of urgency in her step, like she had known exactly how the rest of this day was going to unfold before any of them did. "Somebody get me answers," Mason said quietly. "Because I have a feeling we don't know even half of what just happened in this room today." Nobody responded. Because for the first time since Mason Rourke had walked into that briefing room and called a woman sweetheart in front of 30 of his own men, nobody in the room was certain of anything at all. The pulsing signal didn't stop. Mason stood over the comm station watching the waveform spike every few seconds, each burst a small, violent stutter against the otherwise calm baseline of the restored network. 20 minutes ago, that network hadn't existed. Now it was already under fire again, and the woman who'd built it was gone. "Get her on the line," Mason said. "Sir, I already told you her clearance profile is locked. I can't reach her without going through General Hayes' office, and General Hayes' office isn't picking up." "Then call again." "I've called 4 times. Call a 5th. The comm officer, a young petty officer named Reyes, who had been in the Navy exactly long enough to know when not to argue with a commander whose voice had gone that flat and dangerous, picked up the secure line without another word. Owens crossed the room, arms folded, eyes fixed on the pulsing waveform. "You think it's the same actor?" "I think whoever tried to blind us the first time didn't like that we caught it," Mason said. "And I think they're testing to see if the fix holds. And if it doesn't?" Mason didn't answer, because the honest answer was a version of the truth. None of them wanted spoken out loud in a room full of men who were supposed to walk into hostile territory in less than 2 hours. The signal spiked again, sharper this time, and one of the auxiliary screens flickered. "There," Reyes said, voice tightening. "Sir, I'm seeing packet loss on the secondary relay." "Same pattern as before." "Similar, not identical. It's like they adjusted their approach after the first attempt failed." Briggs, standing near the door with his rifle already checked and slung, let out a low breath. "So, the good news is we're not currently blind." "And the bad news?" Owens asked. "The bad news is somebody's still trying to make us blind, and the only person who knows how to stop them just walked out of the building." Mason's jaw worked. He hated how true that was. He hated it because it meant the entire operational security of his team, the mission he had built his career on being able to protect, now depended on a woman he had mocked in front of 30 of his own men less than 2 hours ago. "Reyes," Mason said. "Try her personal line." "Sir, I don't have—" "Find it." Reyes hesitated only a second before pulling up the personnel database, fingers moving fast. A number appeared. He dialed it on speaker without being told to. It rang twice. "Carter?" Her voice was flat, unhurried, like she'd been expecting the call. "Dr. Carter, this is Commander Rourke." A pause, brief and pointed. "I'm aware, Commander. Caller ID works on secure lines too." Briggs snorted despite himself, then caught Mason's glare and straightened his face. "We've got a second intrusion attempt," Mason said, dropping the pretense entirely. "Same signature-adjusted approach. It's hitting the secondary relay." "I know," Evelyn said. "I've been watching it since it started." Mason blinked. "You're monitoring the network remotely." "I built the network, Commander. I don't just walk away from something I know is actively under attack because a briefing ended." There was something in her tone that wasn't quite an accusation, but it landed like one anyway. Mason felt the sting of it and pushed past it because there wasn't time for pride right now. "Can you stop it from where you are?" "I can slow it. I can't stop it permanently without physical access to the primary console because whatever they're doing now is testing for weaknesses in the patch I applied in the room. If I don't close those gaps in person, they'll find one eventually. Then get back here. I'm 15 minutes out." "Make it 10. Commander." Her voice sharpened just slightly. "I am already moving. Yelling at me through a phone isn't going to make traffic disappear." Mason exhaled hard through his nose. Behind him, Owens was fighting to keep his expression neutral and failing. "Copy," Mason said. 10 minutes. The line went dead. Reyes looked up at him carefully. "Sir, for what it's worth, packet loss just dropped by about 40%. Meaning whatever she's doing, from wherever she is, it's working." Mason stared at the screen, at the waveform, easing from violent spikes into something closer to a manageable rhythm, and felt that same cold, uncomfortable feeling settle into his chest again. The one that had started the moment he'd watched her rebuild an entire battlefield network in under 4 minutes. He was starting to understand that everything he thought he knew about competence, about who belonged in that room, had been wrong in a way that was going to take a lot longer than an apology to fix. 9 minutes later, the secure door opened, and Evelyn walked back in like she'd never left. She didn't look at Mason. She didn't look at anyone. She went straight to the primary console, dropped into the chair like it belonged to her, and started working before she'd even fully sat down. "Talk to me," she said, not looking up. "What changed since I left?" Reyes rattled off the technical details, and Mason watched the exchange with something close to disbelief. She absorbed information the way other people breathed, effortlessly, immediately converting it into action. Her hands moved across the console with the same terrifying precision he'd watched 20 minutes earlier. Except this time, there was no panic in the room to match it. Just quiet, focused competence, and 30 men who had gone from laughing at her to watching her like she was the only stable thing in a room that had nearly come apart twice that morning. "Got it," she said after 90 seconds. "They're not trying to blind you this time. They're testing the seams, looking for a way back in that doesn't trip the same alarms. Can you shut it down?" "I already am." Her fingers kept moving. "But I want you to understand something, Commander, because it's important, and I don't think you fully grasped it the first time. This isn't random. This isn't some opportunistic actor who got lucky. Whoever's doing this knows your system architecture at a level that requires either advanced reconnaissance over months or... She stopped. Or what? Mason asked. Evelyn's hands slowed on the keyboard. Or inside knowledge, she said quietly. The room went still in that particular way it had twice already that day. The kind of stillness that came when everyone in the room understood the same ugly thing at the same moment. You're saying someone in this building, Owen said. I'm saying someone with detailed knowledge of this network's architecture, Evelyn said carefully. That could be someone in this building. It could be someone who used to work in this building. It could be someone who had access to documentation that should have been destroyed years ago. I don't know yet, but I know it's not a stranger guessing at vulnerabilities from the outside. Mason felt his pulse pick up. How do we find out who? You don't, Evelyn said. I do. And I need about 20 minutes of uninterrupted access to trace the signature back through the relay logs before your second wave attempt erases the trail. You have 10. Evelyn looked up at him for the first time since she'd walked back in, and there was something almost amused in her expression, though her voice stayed perfectly level. You really do think shortening my deadlines makes things happen faster, don't you, Commander? Briggs laughed out loud this time, a real laugh before he could stop himself, and even Owens's mouth twitched at the corner. Mason didn't find it funny, but he also didn't argue. 10 minutes, he said again, quieter this time. Because in 10 minutes, I need to brief my team on final deployment, and I need to know whether I'm sending them into a clean operation or one that's still compromised. Understood, Evelyn said, and went back to work. The next 10 minutes felt longer than the entire briefing that had preceded them. Mason paced. Briggs checked his gear for the third time. Owen stood near Evelyn's shoulder watching lines of code scroll across the screen that meant absolutely nothing to him, but that he watched anyway, like proximity to her focus might somehow help. You used to do this kind of work in the field? Owens asked quietly, more to fill the silence than out of real expectation of an answer. Evelyn didn't look away from the screen. I don't talk about what I used to do, Master Chief. Fair enough. But no, she added after a pause. Not the way you mean. Owens waited, sensing there was more, and after a moment there was. I used to be the reason other people's work in the field succeeded or failed, Evelyn said. That's different from being in the field. It's not less dangerous, it's just less visible. Owens absorbed that, quietly filing it away. Understanding for the first time that the woman in front of him carried a kind of weight most of the operators in that room would never fully understand, because it wasn't the kind of weight you could see in a scar or a medal. 9 minutes and 40 seconds and Evelyn sat back. Got a partial signature? She said. It's not a full trace. Whoever built this was careful. Deliberately. Careful, the kind of careful that comes from knowing exactly what red flags to avoid. But I found a fragment of the intrusion code that matches a development pattern. Matches what? Mason asked. Evelyn hesitated, and for the first time since she'd walked into that briefing room hours earlier, she looked genuinely uncertain about whether to say what she was thinking. It matches internal coding conventions used in this command's own systems division, she said finally. Not exactly, but close enough that random chance seems unlikely. The words hit the room like a physical weight. You're telling me somebody in our own systems division built the tool used to attack us, Owen said slowly. I'm telling you the code pattern is consistent with someone trained here, or by someone who trained here, Evelyn said. That's not the same as certainty, but it's not nothing. Mason felt his stomach drop. Their systems division was small. 12 people, maybe fewer, all of them vetted all of them. Cleared all of them men and women he'd trusted with the digital backbone of every operation his team had run for the last 3 years. Give me names, Mason said. I don't have names, I have a pattern. Then give me the pattern and I'll find the names. Commander. Evelyn's voice sharpened, cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. If I hand you a half-formed accusation right now, and you go storming into your systems division demanding answers based on a coding pattern that could theoretically apply to 12 people who've never done anything wrong in their lives, you will tip off whoever's actually responsible before we have anything solid enough to act on. You will also destroy the career of anyone you accuse wrongly, and given the way this morning has gone, Commander, I don't think you want to add another mistake like that to your list." The room went dead silent. Briggs actually took a step back, like he wanted to physically distance himself from the line Mason had just been handed. Mason's face went tight, jaw working, and for a moment, it looked like he might snap back at her. Instead, something in his expression shifted, cracked open just slightly, and what came out instead was quieter than anyone expected. "You're right," he said. Evelyn blinked, clearly not expecting that either. "I've made enough mistakes today," Mason continued, voice low. "I'm not interested in adding one that cost someone their career because I wanted to feel like I was doing something instead of waiting." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Evelyn nodded once and turned back to the console. "Then let me keep working, quietly. And let's get your team ready to deploy on schedule because right now the biggest risk to that mission isn't a mole we haven't identified yet. It's you running out of time to brief them." Mason looked at the clock. She was right. Deployment was 90 minutes out, and his team still needed a full walkthrough of the corrected data. "Owens," he said, "get everyone assembled." "Copy that." As the room shifted into motion again, gear checks and final briefings, and the low hum of 30 men preparing to walk into hostile territory. Mason lingered near the console for a moment longer than he needed to. "Dr. Carter?" She didn't look up. "Commander? Are my men walking into a clean operation or not?" Evelyn finally turned to face him, and there was something almost gentle in her expression, now gentler than anything she'd shown him since she'd first walked through that door. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I know they're walking into a safer one than they would have 30 minutes ago, and I know I'm not going anywhere until I'm certain." It wasn't the reassurance he wanted, but it was the truth, and something about the fact that she gave it to him straight, without softening it into something easier to hear, made him trust her more than any confident lie could have. "Okay," he said quietly. He turned to walk toward his team, then stopped. "Dr. Carter." "Yes. Thank you." She studied him for a moment like she was deciding whether the apology buried inside those two words was real. "You're welcome, Commander," she said finally. "Now go brief your men. The clock doesn't care how either of us feels about this morning." The final briefing took 22 minutes, and it was nothing like the one that had started the day. Mason walked his team through the corrected coordinates with a precision he usually reserved for missions. He'd rehearsed a dozen times, except this time the data had been rebuilt from nothing in under 4 minutes, by a woman half the room had mocked before they understood what she was capable of. Nobody laughed this time. "Insertion point is here," Mason said, pointing to the corrected overlay glowing steady on the screen. 2 clicks north of the original plan, which puts us outside the kill zone the false data was steering us into. Patrol rotation confirmed at 38-minute intervals, verified against live feed as of 6 minutes ago. "Verified by who?" one of the younger operators asked. "By Dr. Carter," Mason said, and there was no hesitation in his voice this time. "Who has been monitoring this network personally since the intrusion began, and who will continue monitoring it throughout the operation from this command center." A few heads turned toward Evelyn, still seated at the console, still working apparently unbothered by the sudden attention. "She'll have eyes on your comm relay the entire time you're in the field," Mason continued. "If anything looks wrong with the data you're receiving, if anything feels off, you trust her assessment over the numbers on your HUD. Is that understood?" A pause. Then Briggs, standing near the front, said, "Understood, Commander." And the rest of the team echoed it a half-second later. No hesitation, no smirks, nothing left of the room that had laughed 2 hours earlier. Owens caught Mason's eye across the room and gave a small nod, the kind that said more than words could have. Mason moved through the rest of the briefing with the same discipline he always brought, but there was something different underneath it now. Something humbler, something that hadn't been there when the day started. He'd walked into this briefing room that morning believing he already knew everything worth knowing about who deserved respect in it. He was starting to understand how wrong that belief had been. The team began final gear checks with 40 minutes left on the clock. Mason found himself standing near Evelyn's console again, watching her work, unable to walk away just yet. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Why didn't you tell me who you really are back in the briefing, when I was... He stopped, unwilling to say the word out loud again even now. When I was giving you a hard time. Evelyn's hands paused on the keyboard just for a moment. Because it wouldn't have mattered, she said. If I'd announced my full clearance level the second I walked through that door, you would have treated me differently, sure. But it wouldn't have changed anything about how you actually saw me. You would have respected the title, not the person. Mason absorbed that slowly, and it stung more than he expected it to, mostly because he suspected she was right. That's not entirely fair, he said, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. Maybe not, Evelyn said. But I've spent a long time in rooms like this one, Commander. I've learned that the fastest way to find out who someone really is isn't to tell them who you are. It's to watch what they do when they think you're nobody. The words landed heavier than she'd probably intended, and Mason stood there for a long moment, absorbing them, understanding that he had failed that particular test in front of 30 of his own men, and that everyone in that room had watched him fail it. I'm not proud of how I acted, he said finally. I know, Evelyn said, and went back to work. That's the only reason I came back. The deployment clock hit 0, and the team moved out. Mason led from the front the way he always did, boots hitting the ground with the same controlled aggression that had carried him through 19 years and more operations than he could count on both hands. Behind him, 5 operators moved in formation weapons, ready comms, live the corrected tactical data, glowing steady in their HUDs. In the command center, Evelyn watched 6 live feeds simultaneously tracking their position against the satellite overlay cross-referencing patrol data in real time, her focus so absolute that Owen, standing beside her, found himself holding his breath along with her without quite realizing he was doing it. Team is at the insertion point, Reyes reported. 15 seconds ahead of schedule. Copy, Evelyn said. Patrol rotation confirms clear window. They have approximately 6 minutes before the next sweep passes through that corridor. In the field, Mason's voice came through low and controlled. Command confirm window. Confirmed, Evelyn said into her headset. 6 minutes, Commander. Move fast. Copy that. The team advanced, and for the first 4 minutes, everything went exactly according to the corrected plan. Mason felt something settle in his chest, a rhythm he recognized, the particular calm that came when a mission was unfolding the way it was supposed to. Then Evelyn's voice cut through the calm, sharp and sudden. Command to team hold position. Mason froze mid-step, fist raised, the rest of the team stopping instantly behind him. Talk to me, he said quietly into his mic. I'm seeing thermal signatures that don't match the confirmed patrol pattern. Evelyn said, her voice tight with focus. 200 meters ahead of your position, moving perpendicular to the corridor you're walking through. That's not on the corrected overlay. I know. It wasn't there 90 seconds ago either. Mason's pulse spiked. New patrol. Unclear. Could be a routine deviation. Could be someone adjusting position because they know you're coming. Briggs, crouched behind Mason, whispered, How would they know we're coming? Nobody answered, because the answer was sitting there in the back of everyone's mind, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. The mole. The insider knowledge. The possibility that somewhere between the command center and this exact stretch of hostile ground, someone had passed along more than just a corrupted data feed. Options, Mason said into his mic. Hold 30 seconds, Evelyn said. Let me confirm before you commit to a direction, because moving wrong right now could put you directly in their path instead of away from it. 30 seconds had never felt longer. Mason crouched low, team, frozen behind him, every second stretching out. While somewhere miles away, a woman he'd mocked 6 hours earlier held the fate of 5 armed men in her hands, through nothing but a data feed and her own steady judgment. Got it, Evelyn said finally. It's a deviation, not a new unit. Their patrol officer is running early, probably compensating for the schedule change my earlier fix introduced when I corrected the false telemetry. They'll clear your corridor in approximately 40 seconds if you hold here. And if we don't hold, then you walk directly into their sightline in the next 15 seconds, and this operation becomes a firefight instead of an extraction. Mason didn't hesitate. Copy, Holding. The team held motionless, weapons ready, breath controlled, while a hostile patrol crossed close enough that two of the younger operators could hear voices carried faintly on the wind. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed louder than necessary. And when the voices faded, when the thermal signature on Evelyn's screen finally cleared the corridor, Mason felt something in his chest unclench for the first time since the operation began. "Clear," Evelyn said. "You're good to move." "Copy that. Moving." The team advanced again, faster now, making up the time they'd lost, and for the next 6 minutes, Evelyn's voice guided them through 2 more minor deviations, small course corrections, that would have gone unnoticed by anyone without her exact level of attention. Each one small enough that no single adjustment felt dramatic, but together, they added up to a team that reached the hostage location without a single shot fired. "In position," Mason reported. "Structure confirmed. Beginning entry sequence." "Copy," Evelyn said. "I have eyes on thermal signatures inside the structure. 6 individuals in the primary room positioned consistent with hostage restraint. 2 additional signatures in the adjacent room consistent with guard positioning." "Copy that. Breaching in 3-2. The line cut, not faded, not glitched. Cut clean and sudden, the way a wire gets severed rather than worn through. "Command, do you copy?" Mason's voice came through tight with tension. "Command, say again. We've lost visual feed." Evelyn's fingers flew across the console, and for the first time since Mason had met her, he heard something in her voice that sounded almost like alarm. "I'm seeing it too," she said, more to herself than to anyone in the room. "Someone just cut the feed at the source, not on our end." "The mole," Owen said quietly. "Maybe?" Evelyn didn't look up, hands moving faster now, tracing the severed connection back through the network architecture with the same desperate speed she'd used to rebuild the entire system hours earlier. Or someone anticipating exactly when we'd need visibility most, and choosing that exact moment to take it away. In the field, Mason's voice came through again, stripped of everything except pure operational focus. "Command, we are blind. Repeat, we are blind. Proceeding with breach on original intel. If you can restore visual, do it now, because once we're inside, I need eyes on that second room before my men walk into it." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I need 90 seconds, she said. "You have 30? Mason's voice snapped back. "Because that's how long it takes us to clear the outer door." The room went taut with a tension so thick it felt physical. Owen stood frozen, watching Evelyn's hands move faster than he'd ever seen anyone type. Watching her eyes flick across 3 different data streams, simultaneously watching a woman who had already saved this operation twice in a single day, now racing against a clock that measured itself in the lives of 5 men she'd never met before that morning. 15 seconds, Reyes said, voice cracking with tension. "I know," Evelyn snapped, not unkindly, just focused past the point of politeness now. 10 seconds. Her fingers hit a final sequence, and the screen flickered, flickered again. 5 seconds. "Command." Mason's voice low and controlled despite everything. "Breaching now." "Wait." Evelyn's voice cracked through the comm, sharp and urgent. "Second room. 2 signatures, not guards. Confirm before you clear it." The line went dead again this time, from Mason's end, swallowed by the sound of a door breaching, and for 3 full seconds, nobody in that command center breathed. Then, Mason's voice came back, ragged, breathless, alive. "Second room confirmed hostile," he said. "Both neutralized. Hostages secure. All 6 accounted for. Command, do you copy?" Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, the only crack in her composure the entire operation had shown, before opening them again and answering with a voice that had returned fully to steady. "Copy that, Commander," she said. "Feed restoring now. Get your team out." "Copy. Extraction in progress." Owens let out a breath he'd apparently been holding for the better part of a minute. She just told him about the second signature with about 2 seconds to spare. "She told him in time," Reyes said quietly. "That's what matters." Evelyn didn't respond to either of them. Her focus had already shifted entirely to the extraction route, tracking the team's movement back toward the pickup zone. Her fingers still moving across the console, even though her voice had gone quiet, the way someone works when the adrenaline of a near catastrophe hasn't fully left their body yet. The extraction took 11 minutes. They were the longest 11 minutes of Mason's professional life, and he'd survived firefights in 3 different countries. Every step of the way, Evelyn's voice guided them through the terrain, tracking patrol movements, adjusting the route twice more to avoid contact, her attention never wavering, even as the adrenaline of the near miss at the breach point clearly hadn't left her system either. "Extraction point in sight," Mason reported finally. "Bird inbound." "Copy," Evelyn said. "You're clear for the next 4 minutes. After that, patrol rotation brings hostiles within visual range of your position." "Copy that. We'll be gone in 3. They were gone in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The helicopter lifted off the extraction point with 6 hostages and 5 operators, all of them alive, all of them accounted for. And in the command center, the room let out a collective breath that had been building since the moment the tactical screens had first gone dark that morning. Owens turned to Evelyn, who had finally leaned back from the console for the first time in nearly 2 hours, her expression somewhere between exhaustion and quiet relief. "You did that," Owens said. "You realize that, right? You just single-handedly ran interference on an entire mission from a chair, and nobody in that field would be coming home right now without you." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked at the screen at the confirmed extraction at the 6 hostage signatures and 5 operator signatures, all moving steadily away from hostile territory. And something in her expression shifted, softened, just slightly, the way exhaustion sometimes lets the truth show through. Cracks that composure usually keeps sealed. "I didn't do it alone," she said quietly. "Your commander held position exactly when I needed him to, twice. That's not nothing, Master Chief." Owens studied her for a moment. "You're not going to take credit for any of this, are you?" "Credit isn't why I do this." "Then why do you do it?" Evelyn looked at him, and for a moment there was something distant in her eyes. Something that suggested the question touched on more than she was willing to say out loud, in a command center full of people she'd known for less than a day. "Because someone has to be the reason people come home," she said finally. "And most days, nobody even knows my name while I'm doing it." Before Owens could respond, the secure comm crackled to life again, this time carrying Mason's voice breathless from the flight, but steady. "Command, this is Rourke. We are wheels up, all personnel accounted for, hostages secure. Tell Dr. Carter." He paused, and even through the static, something in his voice had changed completely from the man who'd walked into that briefing room that morning. "Tell her I owe her more than I know how to say right now." Evelyn reached for the comm herself before Reyes could relay the message. "I hear you, Commander," she said. "Get your team home. We'll talk when you land." "Copy that." The line went quiet, and for a moment the command center simply sat in the aftermath. The particular silence that follows a crisis that could have gone catastrophically wrong, and somehow through skill and timing, and a woman nobody had taken seriously 6 hours earlier hadn't. Then Reyes, still staring at his monitor, spoke up carefully. "Dr. Carter." "Yes?" "I finished the deeper trace on that intrusion signature while the operation was live. I wasn't going to bring it up until things settled, but..." "But what?" Reyes hesitated, glancing at Owens, then back at his screen. "The coding pattern you flagged earlier," he said. "I ran it against personnel access logs going back 18 months. It's not just consistent with someone trained in our systems division." "Reyes." Evelyn's voice had gone very quiet. "What did you find?" "It's consistent with someone who had direct access to Commander Rourke's personal command credentials," Reyes said. "Which means whoever built this either stole his authorization at some point, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment, the exhaustion in her expression giving way to something colder, sharper, the same focus that had carried her through the entire crisis that day, settling back into place like armor. "Or he's involved," she said quietly. "Or someone very close to him is." Owens's face went pale. "That's not possible. I've served under that man for 6 years. "I'm not saying it's him," Evelyn said carefully. "I'm saying his credentials were used, which means someone with access to him personally or digitally is sitting inside a circle most people would never think to look at." The room went silent again, The particular silence of people realizing the danger they thought they'd survived might only just be beginning. Evelyn looked back at the screen at the fading confirmation of a successful extraction at 6 hostages and 5 operators flying home safely because of a mission she'd rebuilt from nothing in under 4 minutes. And somewhere underneath the relief of that success, a new and colder question had already started to take root. If Mason Rourke's own credentials had been used to help build the trap his team had almost walked into that morning, then the enemy they were looking for wasn't outside the wire at all. It was already standing somewhere inside the walls of Naval Special Warfare Base Coronado, close enough to reach out and touch, and it had been there long before Evelyn Carter ever walked through that briefing room door. The debrief room felt different than it had 6 hours earlier. Mason walked in, still wearing half his gear, sweat-streaked adrenaline only beginning to fade from his blood, and the first thing he saw was Evelyn standing at the head of the table instead of sitting quietly in the corner. Nobody had told her to stand there. She had simply claimed the space the way she claimed every space she walked into now, and nobody in that room, not even Mason, thought to challenge it anymore. "Talk to me," Mason said, dropping his helmet on the table. "Reyes said something about my credentials." Evelyn didn't soften it. "Whoever built the intrusion code used an access signature tied to your personal command authorization commander. Either your credentials were stolen spoofed, or someone with legitimate access to your authorization used it deliberately." The room went quiet, in the way it had gone quiet 3 times already that day, except this silence had a different weight to it. This one was personal. "You're accusing me," Mason said, and his voice had an edge to it that hadn't been there in hours. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Evelyn said evenly. "I'm telling you what the data shows. There's a difference, and I need you to understand that difference before your pride gets in the way of actually solving this." Mason's jaw tightened. Briggs and Owens exchanged a glance, the kind that said neither of them wanted to be standing in this particular room for this particular conversation. "When was the last time anyone else had physical access to your terminal?" Evelyn asked. Mason thought back, forcing himself to slow down to actually consider the question instead of reacting to it. "I don't leave my terminal open. Ever." "Everyone says that," Evelyn said. "It's rarely true." "It's true for me." "Then who has your override codes, not your login? Your physical override, the one that lets someone bypass biometric lock in an emergency?" Mason's face went still. "Command staff," he said slowly. "Myself, Master Chief Owens, and—" He stopped. "And who?" Evelyn pressed. "And the base XO," Mason said. "Captain Voss." Owens's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, the look of a man turning over a memory he didn't like the shape of. "What?" Evelyn said, catching it immediately. "Nothing," Owens said. "It's probably nothing." "Master Chief." Owens hesitated, glancing at Mason before continuing. "Voss has been pushing to fold Dr. Carter's intelligence division under his direct oversight for about 8 months now. Budget consolidation, he calls it. Said her program operates with too much independence, too much funding. Nobody outside her office can fully account for." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "That's not unusual," she said carefully. "Every black budget program gets that kind of scrutiny eventually." "Sure," Owens said. "But he's been vocal about it. More vocal than makes sense for a routine budget dispute." Mason looked between the two of them. "You think Voss is involved in this?" "I don't think anything yet," Evelyn said. "I have a partial code signature, a coincidence involving your override credentials and a base executive officer with a documented motive to want my program shut down or absorbed into something he controls. That's not proof. That's a thread. And I don't pull threads without being certain I know what unravels." "Then let's find out," Mason said, already moving toward the door. "Let's ask him directly." "Commander?" Evelyn's voice cut through the room sharp enough to stop him mid-stride. "If Voss is involved, walking in there and confronting him directly gives him exactly the warning he needs to destroy whatever evidence still exists. We do this carefully, or we don't do it at all." Mason stopped, hand still on the doorframe, breathing hard, every instinct in his body telling him to move fast to confront the threat head-on, the way he'd confronted every threat for 19 years. But something in her voice, the same steady certainty that had guided his team through a compromised battlefield hours earlier, made him hesitate. "Fine," he said finally. "Your call. How do we do this carefully?" Evelyn sat back down at the console, already pulling up new windows of data. "I need access to the base's physical security logs. Door entries, badge scans, camera footage from the systems division corridor over the last 6 months. If Voss has been accessing restricted areas he shouldn't have reason to be in, it'll show a pattern." "That's going to take hours," Reyes said. "Then we start now," Evelyn said, "because every hour we wait is an hour he has to cover his tracks if he already suspects we're looking." Mason watched her work for a moment, the same focused intensity that had defined every hour since she'd walked into that briefing room, and something occurred to him that hadn't fully landed until just now. "You've done this before," he said. "Not the technical work. This. Hunting someone inside an organization who's supposed to be trusted." Evelyn didn't look up. "More times than I'd like." "How many?" "Enough that I stopped being surprised by who it turns out to be," she said quietly. "It's never who you expect. And it's always someone who convinced themselves they had a good reason." Mason absorbed that in silence, watching her pull badge logs, cross-reference timestamps, build a picture with the same patient precision she'd used to rebuild an entire battlefield network from nothing. He thought about how close he'd come to writing her off completely that morning, how confidently he'd stood over her and called her sweetheart in front of 30 men, and felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "Got something," Evelyn said 40 minutes later, and the room converged around her screen instantly. "Talk to us," Owen said. "Captain Voss's badge accessed the Systems Division server room 11 times over the last 6 months," Evelyn said, scrolling through timestamps. "All 11 visits occurred outside his normal duty hours, late evening, early morning weekends, and every single one of them falls within 48 hours of a scheduled operational briefing for a Tier 1 mission." The room absorbed that in silence. "That's not a coincidence," Briggs said quietly. "No," Evelyn agreed. "It's a pattern. And patterns like this usually mean someone's been positioning themselves to have exactly the kind of access they'd need if they ever decided to compromise a live operation." Mason felt something cold settle in his stomach. 11 times, and nobody flagged it. "Base executive officers have broad access privileges," Evelyn said. "Nobody flags an XO entering a server room because on paper it's completely within his authority to be there. That's exactly why it's such an effective way to hide in plain sight." "So what do we do with this?" Owens asked. "It's still not proof he did anything. He could have legitimate reasons." "He could," Evelyn agreed. "Which is why I need one more piece before we move on him." "What piece?" "I need to know if his badge access correlates with the exact timestamps of the intrusion code being planted into the network," Evelyn said, already pulling up a new window. "If those two things line up, we're not looking at coincidence anymore. We're looking at opportunity that matches motive, that matches method." The room went quiet again. Everyone watching her work, watching two separate timelines slowly converge on the screen in front of them, watching a possibility become something closer to certainty with every passing second. "There," Evelyn said finally, and her voice had gone very still. 6 hours before this morning's briefing, Voss's badge accessed the server room at 2:14 a.m. The intrusion code was planted into the satellite relay system at 2:31 a.m. 17 minutes. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "That's him," Mason said quietly. "That's our mole." "That's strong circumstantial evidence," Evelyn corrected, though even she couldn't fully keep the certainty out of her voice now. "It's not a confession, but it's enough that I think we need to bring this directly to General Hayes before we do anything else, because accusing a base executive officer of treason is not a decision either of us gets to make alone." Mason nodded slowly, then straightened, something hardening in his expression. "I'll call it in." "Commander?" Evelyn's voice stopped him again. "There's something else you need to consider first." "What?" "If Voss is our mole, and he's been planting intrusion tools into your network for 6 months, he's not just responsible for what happened this morning. He's had access to every operational briefing, every mission plan, every piece of classified data this base has generated in that entire window." The weight of that settled over the room slowly, each person understanding a different piece of what it meant. Every mission, Briggs said quietly. Every mission we've run in the last 6 months. Every one. Evelyn confirmed. Which means, if he's been selling that information, or passing it along to someone we need to understand how many previous operations may have been compromised without anyone realizing it at the time. Mason felt something like nausea rise in his chest. 6 months. Dozens of missions. Men who had walked into hostile territory believing their intelligence was clean, never knowing that somewhere behind the scenes, a man they trusted might have been quietly selling the details of their survival to the highest bidder. I need names, Mason said, voice low and dangerous now. Every operation in the last 6 months that Voss had access to. I'm already pulling them, Evelyn said. But Commander, before you do anything with that list, I need you to hear me clearly. We do not confront him without authorization from above. This is no longer a technical problem I can solve with a keyboard. This is a criminal investigation, and if we handle it wrong, a genuinely dangerous man walks free because we tipped our hand too early. Mason's hands curled into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to walk down the hall and confront Voss directly, to demand answers, to make someone account for the fact that his men had almost died that morning because of a betrayal from inside their own walls. Commander, Evelyn said again, softer this time. I know what you're feeling right now. I've felt it before too, but rage doesn't catch a spy. Patience does. Mason looked at her for a long moment, and something in her steady, unshakable calm reached through the fury building in his chest and pulled him back from the edge of it. Call it in, he said finally. General Hayes, now. Evelyn nodded and reached for the secure line. The call took 4 minutes, most of it spent on hold while Evelyn's clearance level was verified through 3 separate layers of security protocol, each one slower and more deliberate than the last. Mason paced the length of the room. Owen stood with his arms crossed, staring at nothing, and Briggs kept glancing at the door like he expected Voss to walk through it at any moment. Finally, a voice came through the line, deep and measured, carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent decades learning to sound calm in moments that weren't. This is Hayes. General, this is Dr. Carter, Evelyn said. I need to report a probable security compromise involving Captain Daniel Voss, Base Executive Officer at Coronado. There was a pause on the line, brief but noticeable. Explain, General Hayes said. Evelyn laid it out with the same precision she'd brought to everything else that day. Timestamps and badge logs and code signatures building the case, methodically leaving no room for doubt or exaggeration, presenting exactly what the data showed, and nothing more. When she finished, the line was silent for a long moment. How confident are you in this assessment, Dr. Carter? Hayes asked finally. Confident enough that I believe immediate action is warranted, Evelyn said. Not confident enough to call it proven beyond doubt without a formal investigation. But General, if I'm right, and we wait, we risk him destroying evidence, fleeing, or worse, continuing to compromise operations while we deliberate. Another pause. I'm 4 minutes out, Hayes said. I was already inbound to Coronado for a separate briefing on your program's operational status, Dr. Carter. Good timing or bad, depending on how you want to look at it. Secure the server room. Do not confront Voss directly. Do not alert him. I want eyes on him and nothing more until I arrive. Copy that, General. The line went dead, and the room let out a breath collectively, the tension shifting from investigation into something closer to anticipation, the particular held breath quality of people waiting for a situation to finally break open. 4 minutes, Owen said. Command Master Chief, get eyes on Voss's office, quietly. Nobody approaches him. On it. Briggs said, already moving toward the door. Mason watched him go, then turned back to Evelyn, who had gone very still at the console. Her earlier focus replaced by something quieter, more contained. You okay? He asked, and the question surprised even him, coming out softer than he expected. Evelyn glanced at him. Why do you ask? Because you've been running on nothing but adrenaline and focus since 6 this morning, and I don't think anyone in this room has asked you that yet. Something flickered across her face, brief and unguarded, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I'm fine, Commander, she said. This isn't the first time I've had to sit across a table from someone I thought I could trust and watch the evidence prove me wrong. You knew Voss. I've worked with him on budget reviews for 2 years, Evelyn said quietly. He's argued with me in front of senior staff more times than I can count. He's called my program, wasteful, unaccountable, a black hole for funding that should go to conventional operations instead. I always assumed it was ego, territorial thinking. I never once considered that underneath all of it he might have been. She trailed off, and Mason watched her jaw tighten, watched her force the sentence back under control before it could finish itself. You couldn't have known, Mason said. That's what people always say after the fact. Evelyn said, an edge of old tired bitterness in her voice now. It doesn't make the not knowing feel any less like failure. Mason understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. He thought about the mission plan he'd walked his team through with absolute confidence that morning. The trap he'd nearly led them into without ever questioning the data in front of him, and recognized the same particular ache in himself that he now heard in her voice. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I don't think either of us gets to blame ourselves for trusting people who were supposed to be trustworthy. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, some small recalibration of how she'd been holding him in her mind since that morning. That's surprisingly generous, Commander, she said. Coming from you. I've had a rough education today, Mason said. About a lot of things. Before either of them could say more, the secure door opened and Briggs stepped back in, breathing hard from a fast walk down the corridor. Voss is in his office, he reported. But something's wrong. He's got 2 duffel bags packed by his desk, and he's on a secure line I don't recognize the protocol for. Evelyn's expression went cold and sharp instantly. He knows. Knows what? Owens asked. He knows we're onto him, Evelyn said, already standing, already moving toward the door with an urgency that hadn't been there a moment before. Someone tipped him off, or he's simply smart enough to sense the timeline closing in. Either way, he's preparing to run. General Hayes said don't approach him, Mason said. General Hayes also didn't know he'd be packing bags and getting on unauthorized comm lines, Evelyn said, already moving down the corridor with Mason and Briggs falling in step behind her. If he leaves this base in the next 10 minutes, we may never get another chance to prove what he's done, and every operation he's compromised over the last 6 months goes unaccounted for. They reached the corridor outside Voss's office, just as the door opened from the inside. Captain Daniel Voss stepped out, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of officer whose presence had commanded rooms for 30 years through sheer institutional weight rather than charisma. He froze the instant he saw the 3 of them standing there, and for just a fraction of a second, something raw and unguarded crossed his face before the mask of professional composure slammed back into place. Commander Rourke, Voss said, voice even. Dr. Carter, is there a problem? Going somewhere, Captain, Mason asked, nodding toward the duffel bags visible through the open door behind him. Personal leave, Voss said smoothly. Approved last week. Family emergency. Funny, Evelyn said, stepping forward, voice deceptively calm. I don't see any leave request in the personnel system. Voss's eyes flicked to her, something cold settling behind them. I wasn't aware civilian intelligence contractors had access to base personnel systems, Dr. Carter. I have access to a lot of things, Captain, Evelyn said. For instance, I have access to badge logs showing 11 unauthorized visits to the Systems Division server room over the last 6 months, all of them occurring within 48 hours of classified operational briefings. Voss's face didn't move, but something in his stillness changed, went rigid, in a way that betrayed him more than any expression could have. I don't know what you're implying, he said. I'm not implying anything, Evelyn said. I'm stating facts. Your badge access at 2:14 this morning, 17 minutes before an intrusion code was planted into the network responsible for this morning's operation. An intrusion that nearly cost 5 operators their lives. The corridor went very quiet. This is a serious accusation, Dr. Voss said, voice tightening now, the smooth professionalism starting to crack at the edges. One I'd advise you to be very careful making without proper authorization. General Hayes is 4 minutes out. Mason said, stepping forward, his voice carrying the flat, dangerous calm that came before violence in men who had spent their careers controlling it. He's already been briefed, so I'd advise you to be very careful about what you do in the next 4 minutes, Captain, because right now you're the only person in this hallway who has something to lose from standing still. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Voss's hand shifted slow and deliberate toward the inside of his jacket. Mason's whole body tensed, weight shifting forward onto the balls of his feet, every instinct honed by 19 years of combat screaming that the next half-second mattered more than almost any half-second in his career. "Don't!" Evelyn said, voice sharp and sudden, cutting through the tension. "Captain, whatever you're reaching for, I promise you it does not end the way you think it does." Voss's hand froze. For 3 full seconds, the corridor held its breath. Mason ready to move Briggs, already reaching for his own sidearm. Evelyn standing directly in the line of whatever was about to happen, with a composure that Mason would later realize had taken more courage than anything he'd done in the field that entire day. Then Voss's shoulders dropped just slightly, the fight visibly draining out of him. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "Then tell us what it is," Evelyn said, still perfectly calm, still standing her ground. "Because right now, Captain, everything I have says you sold out this base and the men who trust it. I'd very much like to be wrong about that." Voss's jaw worked, some internal battle playing out behind his eyes, and for a moment, Mason thought he might actually explain himself, might actually give them something honest, before this entire situation collapsed into something far uglier. Instead, Voss moved. Faster than a man his age had any right to move, shoving past Briggs and breaking into a sprint down the corridor toward the emergency stairwell. "Stop him!" Mason shouted, already moving, boots pounding against the floor as he launched into pursuit, Briggs a half-step behind him. Voss hit the stairwell door hard, throwing it open, and Mason caught a glimpse of him disappearing down the stairs 2 at a time, moving with the desperate urgency of a man who understood exactly how much he had to lose. "Base security lock down all exits." Mason barked into his comm, taking the stairs 3 at a time behind him. "Executive Officer Voss is fleeing on foot. Consider him a flight risk. Do not let him leave this building." Behind him, he could hear Evelyn's voice, calm and controlled over the comm, coordinating with base security, pulling up camera feeds, tracking Voss's movement through the building in real time, even as Mason chased him through it in person. "He's heading for the west stairwell exit." Evelyn's voice came through Mason's earpiece. "That leads directly to the parking structure. If he reaches a vehicle, we lose him." "Copy," Mason said, breathing hard, pushing harder, closing the distance floor by floor. "Briggs cut him off at the ground-level exit." "On it!" Mason burst through the door onto the ground floor just as Voss reached it from the opposite direction, and for a fraction of a second, the 2 men locked eyes across the corridor 20 feet apart, both of them breathing hard. "Don't do this, Captain," Mason said, slowing his approach, hands raised slightly, every instinct in him coiled and ready, but controlled. "Whatever's happening here running makes it worse. Whatever you did, whatever you were forced into running, makes you look guilty of every single thing we suspect, and gives you no chance to explain any of it." Voss's chest heaved, sweat on his forehead, the composed executive officer completely gone, now replaced by something desperate and cornered. "You don't understand," Voss said. "You don't know what they threatened, what they had on me." "Then tell me," Mason said, taking a slow step forward. "Tell me right now, before this becomes something neither of us can walk back from." For a moment it looked like Voss might actually do it. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him for the second time in 5 minutes, and something like relief flickered across his exhausted face. Then the parking structure door beside him burst open, and Briggs came through it, fast weapon raised, shouting for Voss to get on the ground. Voss flinched, some primal instinct overriding whatever moment of surrender had been building, and he lunged toward the exit instead of complying. Mason moved without thinking, closing the last 10 feet in under 2 seconds, tackling Voss to the ground, just short of the door, the 2 of them hitting the floor hard. Voss struggling for only a few seconds before the fight finally completely left him. "It's over," Mason said, pinning him down, breathing hard. It's over, Captain. Voss stopped struggling, and beneath Mason's grip, the older man finally went still, chest heaving, something broken and exhausted in his expression that hadn't been there a minute ago. They said no one would get hurt. Voss said quietly, almost to himself. They said it was just information, just numbers on a page. They never told me what it would actually cost. Briggs cuffed him while Mason held him down, and by the time base security arrived to take custody, Voss had gone completely silent, staring at nothing, the weight of whatever he'd done finally settling over him in a way that no amount of running could outpace. Mason stood slowly breathing hard and found Evelyn standing at the end of the corridor, having arrived just in time to watch the last 30 seconds unfold. Her expression was unreadable, a complicated mixture of relief and something heavier underneath it. "You good?" Mason asked. "I'm fine," Evelyn said. "You're the one who just tackled a man twice your training level, thought he'd never need to use. Occupational hazard," Mason said. And for the first time all day, something that almost resembled a smile flickered across his face. It didn't last long. The secure door at the end of the corridor opened, and General Jonathan Hayes walked through it, flanked by 2 aides, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the hallway. 4 stars. 31 years of service. A reputation that preceded him into every room he entered, the kind of authority that made even seasoned SEAL commanders straighten their posture without thinking about it. His eyes swept the scene. Voss in custody. Mason breathing hard. Briggs standing guard. Evelyn calm and steady near the center of it all. "Somebody explain to me," Hayes said, voice carrying the particular quiet weight of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. "Why I just walked in on what looks like the aftermath of a foot chase." "Captain Voss attempted to flee custody, sir," Mason said, straightening. "We have strong evidence linking him to the security compromise that nearly cost my team their lives this morning." Hayes's expression darkened, his eyes moving to Voss, who stared at the floor and said nothing. "Dr. Carter," Hayes said, turning toward her. "I want a full report. Now." "Yes, sir," Evelyn said, and began laying out everything. The intrusion, the badge logs, the credential theft, the timeline that connected Voss to 6 months of compromised operational data. Her voice steady and precise, even after everything that had just happened. Hayes listened, without interrupting his expression, growing grimmer with every detail. And when Evelyn finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at Voss with an intensity that made even the disgraced officer flinch. "Take him to secure holding," Hayes said finally to the security detail flanking him. "Full interrogation protocol. I want to know every operation he compromised, every contact he had, and every dollar that changed hands. Starting immediately." The security detail moved Voss away, and the corridor slowly emptied until it was just Hayes Mason, Evelyn Owens, and Briggs, standing in the aftermath of everything that had happened since that morning's briefing. Hayes turned to Mason first. "Commander," he said, "I've read the preliminary reports on this morning's operation. Your team completed a successful hostage extraction under conditions that should have gotten them killed based on compromised intelligence that very nearly sent you directly into a kill zone." "Yes, sir," Mason said. "And the reason that didn't happen," Hayes continued, "the reason 6 hostages and 5 operators are alive right now instead of dead in a ravine 3,000 miles from here is standing right next to you." Mason's jaw tightened, not in defiance, but in something closer to acknowledgement. "Yes, sir," he said again. "I'm aware." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then turned to Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted into something warmer, something that carried the weight of a working relationship built over years rather than hours. "Dr. Carter," he said, "I understand this morning did not begin with the respect your position warrants." Mason felt his stomach tighten, understanding exactly where this was headed, and unable to do anything but stand there and absorb it. "It didn't begin well, General," Evelyn said carefully, "but it resolved appropriately." "That's generous of you," Hayes said, "but I don't think it's entirely accurate." He turned fully toward Mason now, and his voice, when it came, carried none of the diplomatic softness he'd used with Evelyn. "Commander, Do you understand who you were speaking to this morning when you called Dr. Carter sweetheart in front of 30 of your men? Mason's face went rigid. General, that wasn't a question I expected you to answer honestly, Hayes said, cutting him off. It was a question I expected you to sit with, because the answer is that you were speaking to the architect of the intelligence infrastructure that has kept this entire command's operations classified, protected, and functional for the last 3 years. You were speaking to someone who has personally verified the intelligence behind 41 Tier 1 operations run out of this base, every single one of which succeeded without a single operator lost until today, when a compromised network nearly broke that record because of a betrayal she is the one who caught. The corridor was dead silent. She is not a technician, Commander. Hayes continued, his voice hardening with every word. She is not an assistant. And she is not, as you apparently suggested, someone who wandered into the wrong room. Dr. Carter operates with an authorization level that supersedes most of the command staff on this base, myself included, in certain operational contexts, because the program she runs answers directly to Pacific Command leadership and reports through channels most people in this building don't know exist. Mason stood absolutely still, absorbing every word like a physical blow, understanding now with full and complete clarity exactly how badly he had misjudged the moment that morning. Exactly how close his arrogance had come to costing him something he would never have been able to repair. She's in command, Hayes said, and the words landed in the corridor with a finality that left no room for argument. Not just of the intelligence side of this operation, Commander. Of you, if the mission requires it. And after what happened this morning, I'd say it very much did. Mason turned to look at Evelyn and found her watching him with an expression that held no triumph in it at all. No satisfaction at seeing him humbled in front of his own people. Just quiet, exhausted steadiness, the same expression she'd worn through every crisis that day. General, Mason said, finally, voice rough. I owe Dr. Carter an apology that words probably aren't going to be enough to cover. You do, Hayes agreed. But that's between the two of you. What concerns me right now is bigger than one morning's misjudgment. Sir, Owens asked. Hayes's expression darkened again, the momentary focus on Mason's failure giving way to something far more urgent. Voss didn't act alone, Hayes said quietly. 6 months of compromised operational data doesn't get sold to a single buyer without leaving a much wider trail than the one Dr. Carter found this morning. Whoever he was working for has had access to this base's operational patterns for half a year. And I have reason to believe, he paused, glancing at Evelyn with something that looked almost like an unspoken question, that Voss was not the only person on this base receiving instructions from outside this command. Evelyn's expression sharpened instantly. You think there's a second compromised individual? I think, Hayes said slowly, that what we uncovered today was only the surface of something considerably larger, and I think the two of you, his eyes moved between Mason and Evelyn, are the only people I currently trust to dig deeper into it without tipping off whoever else might be involved. The weight of that settled over the corridor, like a physical presence. The relief of Voss's capture giving way almost instantly to a colder, more unsettling realization. Mason looked at Evelyn, and for the first time all day, something passed between them that wasn't tension or mockery or misplaced pride. It was something closer to partnership, forged in the space of a single impossible morning, and neither of them yet fully understood how much further it was about to be tested. Where do we start? Mason asked quietly. Hayes's expression didn't lighten. With the truth, he said, that Voss confessed something to interrogation less than 20 minutes ago that I have not yet shared with either of you, and it changes everything about what we thought this morning's attack was actually for. Hayes led them into a secure conference room 3 doors down, sealed it behind them, and set a tablet on the table that none of them had seen before. Voss talked faster than I expected, he said. Men like him usually do once they understand the alternative is watching everyone they've ever protected turn their back on them for good. What did he say? Mason asked. Hayes didn't answer right away. He looked at Evelyn instead, and something in his expression made her go very still. He wasn't hired to steal operational data, Dr. Carter, Hayes said. Not primarily. The intrusion this morning, the false telemetry, the attempt to send Commander Rourke's team into a kill zone. That was cover. A distraction built to look like a routine intelligence sabotage. Cover for what? Evelyn asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer and didn't want to hear it confirmed. For you, Hayes said quietly. He was paid to create a crisis large enough and public enough that you would be forced into that command center, forced to expose your full technical capability in front of witnesses, forced to reveal exactly how deep your access runs into this base's systems. The room went silent in a way that felt different from every silence before it. Mason watched Evelyn's face carefully, watched the color drain slightly from it, watched her hands, which had been so steady through every crisis that day, curl slowly into fists on the table. They wanted to know what I could do, she said slowly. They wanted to know exactly what you could do, Hayes confirmed. And more importantly, they wanted to know how fast. Because according to Voss, whoever's paying him already suspected you'd built something inside this network that goes beyond standard intelligence architecture. Something they've been trying to get their hands on for over a year. What kind of something? Mason asked. Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes had gone distant, calculating the same look she got when she was 3 steps ahead of a conversation everyone else was still catching up to. General, she said carefully. Did Voss give you a name? Who he was working for? A handler, Hayes said. No confirmed identity yet. Voss claims he never met the person directly, only communicated through encrypted channels and cash drops arranged by intermediaries. But he gave us something else. Hayes tapped the tablet, pulling up a grainy photograph, a partial face caught at an angle blurred by distance and bad lighting. This was taken outside a restaurant in San Diego 11 days ago, Voss's last confirmed contact before this morning's operation. Mason leaned in, studying the image. Male, maybe 40, unremarkable in every way that mattered for identification. You don't recognize him, Hayes said, watching Mason's face. No. Hayes turned the tablet toward Evelyn instead. She went completely still. Dr. Carter. Hayes said, voice gentler now than Mason had heard it all day. Do you recognize this man? For a long moment, Evelyn didn't answer. Her jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on the photograph with an intensity that made the room hold its breath. His name is Marcus Webb, she said finally quietly. Or it was 6 years ago when he worked in my division. Mason felt something shift in the room, the temperature of the conversation dropping several degrees at once. He worked for you, Mason said. He worked with me, Evelyn corrected. Junior analyst, brilliant, ambitious in a way that used to worry me more than it should have. She stopped gathering herself, and Mason watched her push down something that looked uncomfortably close to old grief. He was let go 5 years ago. Security violation. He'd been accessing files outside his clearance level, and when confronted, he claimed he was trying to prove himself, trying to get ahead. I recommended termination instead of prosecution because I believed he was young and stupid rather than dangerous. You believed wrong, Hayes said, not unkindly. Apparently, Evelyn said, and the single word carried more weight than a longer sentence could have. Owens, standing near the door, spoke up carefully. General, if this Webb has spent 5 years building a network capable of orchestrating what happened this morning, what exactly is he after revenge against Dr. Carter personally or something bigger? Both possibly, Hayes said. But Voss said something else during interrogation that I think matters more than the personal angle. He looked directly at Evelyn now. He said Webb specifically wanted confirmation of something called Project Threshold. Does that mean anything to you, Doctor? Evelyn's face went pale in a way Mason hadn't seen from her all day, not even during the worst of the morning's crisis. That program was terminated 3 years ago, she said, voice tight. It shouldn't exist anywhere outside a classified vault that requires Pacific Command authorization to even reference. Apparently, it exists somewhere your former analyst knows about, Hayes said grimly. And apparently, it's valuable enough that he's willing to orchestrate treason inside a naval special warfare base to get confirmation it's real. What is Project Threshold? Mason asked. And for the first time since the morning began, he watched Evelyn hesitate over whether to answer a direct question at all. She looked at Hayes first, some silent exchange passing between them, before finally turning back to Mason. It's a predictive intelligence framework, she said carefully. A system designed to anticipate enemy movement patterns before conventional surveillance can confirm them. Not guesswork. Actual predictive modeling built from years of aggregated battlefield data across multiple theaters. That sounds like something that would save a lot of lives, Mason said slowly, sensing there was more. It would, Evelyn agreed. It also sounds like something that in the wrong hands could be used to predict our operations before we execute them, which is exactly why it was shut down 3 years ago and exactly why almost nobody outside a very small circle knows it ever existed in the first place. The room absorbed that slowly. And Webb thinks it's still active, Owen said. Webb thinks I've kept building it in secret, Evelyn said. Which I haven't. But if he believes I have, and if he believes this morning's chaos would force me to expose enough of my working methods to confirm or deny it. She stopped, something clicking into place behind her eyes. That's it, she said quietly. That's what this morning was really about. It was never really about sabotaging Commander Rourke's mission. That was collateral. The real target was watching how I responded under pressure, seeing what tools I'd deploy to fix a live crisis, because the way I fixed it would tell him whether Threshold's core architecture still exists inside my current systems. Mason felt his stomach turn. So my team almost died so a man with a grudge could run a test. Yes, Evelyn said, and there was no softening it, no attempt to make the truth easier to hear. I'm sorry, Commander. If I'd understood the real motive faster, I might have handled this morning differently. You saved my team, Mason said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. Whatever his reasons, whatever the bigger picture turns out to be, that part doesn't change. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, something passing between them that Hayes noticed but didn't comment on. General, Evelyn said, turning back to business with visible effort. If Webb got what he needed this morning, if he confirmed whatever he was testing for what happens next. That's what worries me, Hayes said. Voss claims Webb was explicit about wanting confirmation before making a move, if he has it now. The secure line on the conference table began ringing before Hayes could finish the sentence. He answered it, listened for exactly 4 seconds, and his expression changed in a way that made everyone in the room straighten instantly. Say that again, Hayes said into the phone voice tight. Another pause. Understood. Lock it down. Nobody in or out until I arrive. He ended the call and looked around the room, and whatever composure he'd maintained through the entire conversation about Threshold and Webb had visibly cracked. What happened? Mason asked. Voss is dead, Hayes said. The room went completely silent. That's not possible, Owen said. He was in secure holding 20 minutes ago. He was found unresponsive in his cell 6 minutes ago, Hayes said. Preliminary assessment suggests poisoning, though we won't know for certain until forensics completes their work. But Master Chief, I don't need forensics to tell me what I already know. Someone silenced him, Evelyn said quietly, before he could give up anything else, which means Webb, or whoever's actually running this, has reach inside this base that goes beyond one compromised executive officer, Hayes said. Someone had access to that holding cell. Someone with clearance high enough to walk in and out without triggering an automatic security review. Mason felt the floor shift beneath him for what felt like the 10th time that day. How many people have that kind of access? Fewer than a dozen, Hayes said grimly. And I'm now looking at every single one of them as a potential suspect, including everyone standing in this room. The accusation, even unspoken, landed heavily. Owens's jaw tightened. Briggs shifted uncomfortably near the door. Mason felt something defensive rise in his chest before he forced it back down. Understanding that Hayes wasn't wrong to consider it. Understanding that after everything that had happened today, trust had become the single most dangerous currency on this base. General, Evelyn said carefully, I understand the need for caution, but right now the priority has to be figuring out what Webb does next, not spending time investigating each other. Both things can happen simultaneously, Doctor, Hayes said. But you're right that time matters more right now. If Webb got confirmation this morning that Threshold's architecture still exists, and if he's willing to kill a co-conspirator to protect that confirmation, then he's moving towards something. And I don't think we have the luxury of a slow investigation to figure out what. What do you suggest? Mason asked. Hayes was quiet for a moment, weighing something before he finally spoke. I want Dr. Carter moved to a secure location immediately, he said. Off-base, isolated, protected. If Webb's endgame involves acquiring Threshold, and Dr. Carter is the only person who fully understands its architecture, she becomes the most valuable target on this entire installation. With respect, General, Evelyn said, hiding me doesn't solve the underlying problem, it just delays it. It keeps you alive while we solve the underlying problem. Hayes said, an edge of finality in his voice that suggested this wasn't actually up for debate. Commander Rourke. Sir. You and your team will provide personal security during the transfer and for the duration of Dr. Carter's protective detail. Given everything that's happened today, I don't trust this to anyone who wasn't in that briefing room this morning and doesn't already understand exactly what's at stake. Mason nodded immediately. Understood, sir. Evelyn opened her mouth to argue further, then closed it, apparently recognizing the futility of fighting a decision Hayes had clearly already made. Where? She asked instead. There's a secure facility 40 minutes from here, Hayes said. Used for exactly this kind of situation. We'll move you within the hour. The transfer preparations moved fast, the kind of controlled urgency Mason recognized from 100 operations before this one, except this time, the person he was protecting wasn't a hostage or an asset in the abstract sense. It was Evelyn walking beside him, through the corridor toward the vehicle bay. Her composure fully restored, but something tighter around her eyes that hadn't been there before Voss's death. You don't have to do this personally, she said quietly as they walked. You've already done enough today, Commander. Your team needs rest. My team rests when this is finished, Mason said. Not before. That's not an answer to what I said. I know, Mason said. I'm doing it anyway. Evelyn glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. Why? Mason considered the question longer than he expected to need. Because 6 hours ago, I looked at you and saw someone who didn't belong in that room, he said finally. And I was wrong about that in a way that could have gotten my entire team killed. I'm not interested in being wrong about you again. Something in Evelyn's expression softened just slightly, the exhaustion of the day showing through for a brief moment, before she pulled her composure back into place. That's the closest thing to a real apology you've given me all day, she said. I'm working up to a better one, Mason said. Give me time. The convoy left the base 20 minutes later, 3 vehicles moving in tight formation. Mason riding directly beside Evelyn in the lead vehicle, Briggs and 2 other operators providing close protection, Owens coordinating from the rear vehicle with constant comm updates. For the first 15 minutes, the drive was uneventful. The kind of tense quiet that came after a day too full of crisis for anyone to relax fully, but calm enough that Mason found himself watching Evelyn instead of watching the road. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things all day, Commander. I don't see why you'd stop now. Fair, Mason said, almost smiling despite everything. Why intelligence work? Someone with your ability could have gone anywhere. Private sector, academia, somewhere that pays better and shoots at you considerably less. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, watching the road pass outside the window. I had a brother, she said finally. Older brother. Army. He died in an ambush 11 years ago because the intelligence he'd been given was 3 days old, and nobody had bothered updating it before he walked his unit into contact. Mason felt something in his chest tighten. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Everyone says that, Evelyn said, echoing the same words she'd used earlier about Voss. Though this time, the bitterness in her voice was older, worn, smoother by years instead of hours. It doesn't change anything. What changed something was deciding that if I couldn't bring him back, I could at least make sure fewer people died the same way he did. That the information keeping soldiers alive would be as current and as accurate as I could possibly make it. That's why you built Threshold, Mason said, understanding now in a way he hadn't before. That's why I built everything, Evelyn said. It's not about being brilliant, Commander, whatever General Hayes wants to say about me. It's about not being able to sit still while people die from something as fixable as bad information. Mason absorbed that in silence, understanding for the first time the full shape of the woman sitting beside him. Understanding that the composure he'd mistaken for coldness that morning had actually been the opposite. A fire so carefully controlled that it had taken him an entire catastrophic day to recognize it for what it was. For what it's worth, he said quietly, your brother would be proud of what you built. Evelyn looked at him, something raw flickering behind her eyes before she forced it back under control. Thank you, she said, voice quieter than he'd heard it all day. That's the first time anyone said that to me who actually understood what it cost to build it. The convoy rounded a bend in the road, and Mason's radio crackled to life. Command, this is lead vehicle, we've got a... The explosion hit before he could finish the sentence. The rear vehicle erupted in a violent burst of fire and twisted metal, the shockwave rocking the lead vehicle even at 100 feet of distance, and Mason's entire world narrowed instantly into pure combat instinct. Contact, contact! He shouted, grabbing Evelyn and pulling her down below the window line as gunfire erupted from the tree line flanking the road. Driver, punch it! Get us clear of the kill zone! The vehicle surged forward, tires screaming, as rounds impacted the armored side panels in a rapid staccato that Mason felt in his teeth more than heard. Owens, radio check! Mason shouted into his comm, and for 3 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but static. Then Owens's voice came through ragged, breathless. Rear vehicle is down. I say again, rear vehicle is down. We have wounded. I need immediate. The transmission cut out. Owens? Owens, say again. Nothing. Mason's chest tightened with a fear more acute than anything he'd felt all day, but training took over before panic could. His mind already calculating options, exits, threat assessment, the same discipline that had carried him through 19 years of combat. Now the only thing standing between Evelyn and whatever was happening on that road behind them. Driver, get us to the rally point, Mason ordered. Briggs, I need eyes on that rear vehicle status. Copy. Briggs' voice came through tense but controlled. Working on it. Commander, our comms getting jammed intermittently. Evelyn, crouched low beside Mason, was already pulling her tablet from her bag, despite the chaos, hands steady, even as gunfire continued to rattle against the vehicle's armor. This is coordinated, she said, voice tight but controlled. That wasn't random ambush positioning. Whoever hit us knew our exact route and timing. Another leak, Mason said grimly. A leak that knew about a transfer that was decided less than an hour ago, Evelyn said. Which means whoever's inside our operation right now isn't Voss. Voss is dead. This is someone else. The vehicle took another hard turn, throwing them both sideways, and Mason caught Evelyn instinctively, one arm wrapped around her to keep her from slamming into the door. Are you hurt? He asked, and the question came out with more urgency than he intended. I'm fine, Evelyn said, though her voice was tighter now, adrenaline finally beginning to crack through her composure. Commander, if this is Webb, if he's escalated to a direct attack instead of just information gathering, that changes everything about what he's willing to do to get what he wants. We'll figure that out once we're not being shot at, Mason said, scanning the road ahead through the front windshield. Driver status. We're clear of the immediate kill zone, Commander, but I'm seeing a second vehicle pursuing, closing fast. Mason twisted to look through the rear window and saw it a dark SUV weaving through traffic behind them, closing the distance with an aggressive urgency that left no doubt about its intent. Briggs, I need you engaging that pursuit vehicle, Mason ordered. Copy, Commander, coming up on your 6. The next 90 seconds passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Briggs's vehicle maneuvering to intercept gunfire exchanged between trained operators and whoever was driving the pursuit vehicle, Mason keeping Evelyn low and shielded, while the driver executed evasive maneuvers that threw both of them against the door panels repeatedly. Pursuit vehicle disabled, Briggs finally reported, breathless. 2 occupants both down. Commander, I need immediate medevac for our rear vehicle personnel. We have 2 wounded, 1 critical. Copy, get coordinates to command. I want a bird in the air in the next 90 seconds, Mason said, and then quieter to Evelyn. You're safe. It's over. Evelyn straightened slowly from where she'd been crouched, breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing visibly through her, but her mind was already moving past the immediate danger toward the larger implication. "It's not over," she said. "Commander, if Webb is willing to attack a protective convoy in broad daylight in American territory against a naval special warfare security detail, he's not being cautious anymore. He's desperate. Which means whatever he thinks he's close to getting, he believes the window to get it is closing fast." "Meaning what?" Mason asked, still scanning for additional threats even as the immediate danger passed. "Meaning he's not planning to wait," Evelyn said. "He's going to make a move soon, today maybe. And if he already believes Threshold's architecture exists inside my systems, his next target isn't going to be a convoy on a public road. It's going to be the systems themselves." The vehicle finally slowed, pulling into a secured rally point, where 2 additional security vehicles waited, and Mason helped Evelyn out. Both of them still catching their breath from an attack that had come far closer to succeeding than either of them wanted to admit. Owens emerged from the wreckage of the rear vehicle a few minutes later, limping blood on his sleeve from a graze wound but alive, and Mason felt something in his chest loosen at the sight of him. "2 of my men are hurt bad, Commander," Owens said grimly. "But we're all alive. Whoever hit us wanted the lead vehicle. They barely engaged us until we started returning fire." "They wanted Evelyn," Mason said quietly. "Looks that way." Owens agreed, then glanced at her. "You all right, Doctor?" "I'm alive," Evelyn said, though her voice carried a weight that suggested the adrenaline was giving way to something heavier now that the immediate danger had passed. "Which is more than I can say for whatever plan I had for handling this quietly." General Hayes arrived at the rally point 20 minutes later, his expression grim, as he surveyed the wreckage, the wounded operators being loaded into medevac transport, the bullet-scarred vehicles that had nearly cost them everything. "This has gone far beyond what I was prepared for," Hayes said, once the immediate chaos had settled, and the 4 of them, Mason, Evelyn, Owens, and Hayes, stood together at the edge of the rally point. "Webb just attacked a protected military convoy in broad daylight. That's not the action of a man running an information